we work for our LPs and our investors too. That's our whole, we're stewards of their capital and we want to return their investment, but we also work for the founders. And I think there's often a misconception about kind of the power dynamic of that the investors are in the decision-making seats and not the founders. No, it is the other way around. It is our job to find and invest in exciting and innovative founders and companies. And so they are in the driver's seat. They are the ones that are building the future. They are the ones that are going to make these things happen. And we get to play a small role in the journey and come along for the ride. So that's what keeps me in. And there's nothing else I'd rather be doing.
Welcome to Behind the Work. I'm so excited to have you on this show. I think you are such a phenomenal human being, and to be able to tell your story today, it means a lot to me. And so I want to get started with your origin story. Who was Miki before she was a founder, an operator, a venture capitalist, and what motivated her? What were her dreams back when she was like 5, 6, 7 years old?
Yeah, I probably for most of my young adult life, up until even college, I was never one of those people that knew exactly what they wanted to do. Like, I don't know if that was your case where you knew that you wanted to be a badass CEO of a nonprofit. But I had friends who had very clear paths. Like they knew that they wanted to be a doctor. And I think that's, the career paths that you're exposed to: doctor, lawyer, teacher. And I think so I went through stints of like, maybe I wanted to be a writer. I was a lot more creative as a kid than I think I am as an adult. I read a lot. I wrote a lot. I won like a young author short story competition. I was just like I was in my head and kind of daydreaming a lot. I was like very creative. So I think I went through, cycles of, I want to be an author. I want to write books, or I want to be a lawyer because that's what I heard people do. And I really had the opportunity, I think, because of access to technology. And so I was really fortunate that my parents provided that, just having a computer at a very young age, and then coming of age with the internet and having access to like things like America Online, and being in chat rooms at a very inappropriate age of 13 and chatting with people from all over the country. And I think it just opened my eyes and made me very curious about what technology could connect us to and like what the internet could do. And so anywhere from like what you could then research as a student in college and getting high-speed internet then, to downloading music illegally from like Napster. I think I was just blown away by what technology gave you access to and what you could learn and who you could meet. And so I think it was in college was really understanding, I don't know what it's going to look like, but I want a role in this like technology internet space. And so, at those times, I don't think there was a lot of exposure into entrepreneurship, startups, tech, VC. I didn't learn about a lot of that stuff until probably the last 10 years. And so back then I was just being more curious about being an early adopter of things and, downloading apps when they came out and being really inspired by Steve Jobs and what he was creating from a product perspective with Apple, and what the iPhone opened up for people and the App Store and like all of those things. So I think I went into college like, how can I just learn and get the college experience and get out as quickly as possible, and start working and actually learn, and gain work experience and kind of figure out what I wanted to do. I had a lot of friends that chose to go to grad school and go to, get their MBA or go to medical school. And I was just like, I'm done with school, no more school. Let me actually just see what's out there, start working, figure out what I like and what I don't like, and then kind of figure out, the next few steps from there.
Yeah, for sure. It's so interesting because by default of like my own career, for some reason, I just have had so many guests that actually just are in tech on my show. And I'm thinking about the last 2 seasons that I've done, where most of the people that I've interviewed that have entered this field in some way or form had exposure to it really early on in their life, whether it was like getting a computer really early on, or having done a program really early on. And I think it's just so telling of like how important early experiences are that inform you of your career path. And I think one of the things I really have enjoyed about your career and just being able to take a front seat into what is Miki up to and what she's done is that you come from what a lot of people in this space would be called like untraditional, like your background traditional. You went to UCLA, you got your degree in sociology. In some way, somehow, you still found yourself in the world of tech, right? And most people will say, you need a computer science degree, you
Mhm.
need a computer engineering degree to be in this industry. But I found that some of the most fabulous operators, founders, and entrepreneurs in this industry don't have
Mhm.
that degree or that kind of credential. And so, take me through the years of how you ended up in this world up to the point where you started Grid110, because you've held many, many different roles
Mhm.
within tech or tech adjacent industries.
Yeah. So living in Los Angeles, graduating from college. So I'm from the Bay Area originally, moved down to LA and have just stayed here ever since. A lot of people are surprised I didn't move back to the Bay Area because of, just the dominance of tech. And I can honestly say I thought about it once and had a very bad experience in an interview and was like, it's not for me. I really don't like this, and I think it can be done differently. And so I've been really excited and inspired by what's happening in LA, but other ecosystems as well. And so coming out of college, again, graduating, having no idea what my next steps were going to be, I actually took two part-time jobs. One in online marketing and one doing marketing for a bar, because I wasn't ready to get a full, again, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I didn't do the kind of consulting interview routes that a lot of folks were doing, in my senior year. It was more like, I want to learn and, be inspired. But I don't know. I just need some time to explore. And I'd spent, up until then, you spend, from 5 to 18 in school. It's very structured. You know exactly what your next steps are going to be typically, if you follow that kind of high school to career trajectory. And some people have plans for afterwards. And for me, I was just like, this is the first time in my life is completely unstructured. I have no idea what's next. And it's a little scary, but like, I'll be open to figuring that out. So the internships really allowed me to get work experience, specifically again in kind of like the marketing space and in online. So there was a component of a technology, aspect to that. And then leverage the relationships that I had at one of my internships to get my first full-time job, which was at a movie studio. And so really aspiring to work on the digital or technology teams, being in Los Angeles, entertainment capital of the world. I think that was one of the things that I thought about coming out of college is like, oh, maybe I want to work in entertainment. But I want to work on like the tech or online side of entertainment. So I started as an executive assistant, and I have found in my career path, most people that I know that started their career as like an assistant, executive assistant, et cetera, they just get shit done. They're so organized. They're great project managers. They're great leaders even, because I think I was, 23 years old at the time, and I was supporting C-level executives at a major entertainment studio. I was working at MGM Studios. And so to have that bird's eye view of everything that happened from an IT perspective. And so that was anything from the kind of desktop support that supported thousands of employees across the country and globally as we expanded offices, to the software that we were using, to how we transmitted trailers to different theaters and how we communicated what theater should be paired with which film, how we set up microsites for marketing, email newsletter marketing, things like that. So it was really interesting to get just like this very comprehensive perspective from an executive level view of what people were doing and what powered a very large movie studio. It was not glamorous. I was in the IT department, but I learned so much about it. And the people that I work with were just like incredibly smart. And there's a lot of humility around, at least in this department. And then I got my opportunity kind of to get promoted and worked in the online team as a coordinator. So I was managing a email newsletter list of like 1.2 million people. Do you know how stressful it is to send out an email to 1.2 million people? And my boss that I worked for at the time, I think really ingrained in me being very detail oriented, and like just the number of times you have to review and have somebody else review something, catching, mistakes, whether it's like editorial or images and things. And even just with the process of putting together those newsletters, of having to work with a designer who would design it out, and then a developer who would kind of cut it up and program it, just the amount of project management that went into that, I sometimes would try to cut corners and be like, how can I learn Photoshop? So if I need to change a copy or a spelling on something, I can do it myself. It doesn't have to go back in the queue. How can I change a link in the HTML? And so I learned how to edit HTML. I learned how to navigate Photoshop just by sheer one, curiosity, but two, like I don't have time to wait for somebody else to do this. I'm just going to learn how to do it myself. And that has been kind of a reoccurring theme in my entire career of being non-technical by background, but being very curious and wanting to understand. And one, just how to speak to people around it. So speaking to designers and developers and other stakeholders and kind of being like the translator for all of that. So I left MGM after 3 years. I saw it go through an acquisition, massive consolidation, went from thousands of employees globally to 250, and I was still there, and I was inheriting a number of people's different like work as they rolled off and got laid off. I was inheriting more things because I was the cheap talent at the time, but it allowed me to learn so much more. And so I just took every opportunity to take on more responsibilities, to learn more, and then move from there to a startup division of Fox. And it was really exciting for me because I was the youngest person previously on my team by like maybe 15, 20 years, fresh out of college. And I joined a startup team that was all people that within, 5 to 10 years of my age. And it was like a real startup kind of opportunity. It was a new division. I was focusing on young adult content for like theatrical releases within Fox. And I had the opportunity to really learn more about software development there because we were building an in-house kind of video editing software that would enable us to take licensed content and IP from the studio. And so that could be trailer, behind the scenes clips, and then enable fans of the content to be able to like mash it up. This was like in the big mashup days, so that they could create their own content, their own version of a trailer, add music to it, and just make it more engaging and interactive. The president of our studio was leaning really heavily into digital at the time, being this is where people are, this is where they're living, this is how we will reach people. So spent time there and learned how to manage software development projects. So not just kind of email marketing campaigns and small microsites, but actually building technology from the ground up. Left there to join a software development company because I just got the bug of like building things that didn't exist before, understanding how to translate kind of things conceptually into actual requirements for developers and designers, working really closely with them. And was at this company for about 6 years, kind of helping rebuild it from the ground up. It was a desktop software company when I joined. We were converting it into an online software application at the time. So lots of transitions and kind of new things happening there. So that's kind of the I would say the first chapter, like the first 8 years of my career or so was really spent learning and understanding how to operate in the tech space, being really hands-on in building and delivering projects, working with developers and designers, understanding how to communicate across the different stakeholders, kind of climbing the like tech corporate ladder in my own spaces and getting, like the title that I want. The last title that I had at that software development company was actually the VP of GSD, get shit done, because there was no other appropriate title for me to really encompass all the things that I was doing there. And so I learned a lot, but I think at the end of that time, the company ultimately ended up shutting down, didn't have a really great business model, couldn't figure out funding. And I think we were just like too early for the time, for what we were building. And I came to a point of just, massive burnout. I'm very much, I've gotten better about this. I was a workaholic. I was usually like first person in, last person out. I think very much a people pleaser, also something I'm working on. And so felt like I always had to prove something, of myself. Maybe it's coming from a non-traditional background. Maybe it's being a woman of color in spaces where I didn't see a lot of that on our teams. And so I felt like I always had to overdo a lot of things to kind of prove myself and my worth. And I was massively burnt out at the time. I was just like not really feeling fulfilled by the work I was doing. Had learned a lot, but was not excited about it. And so I think closing that chapter was really trying to figure out how could I be fulfilled, in life, and what does that look like? And what am I going to do next? I had no idea. I had no plan. And so I think that really started things turning in my head about like, what would the next phase of my career look like? Who do I want to be surrounded by? How do I want to feel? And kind of just trying to explore different possibilities.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, first of all, that's a testimony, Mickey. I think that that's such an incredible testimony, not to just who you are, but also to how your curiosity has fueled the ways in which you have continued to innovate in your career, right? Like,
Mhm.
starting off really, really, at what a lot of people will call like administrative work, to then
Mhm.
building what you built, and then ultimately getting, your hands wet with technology. Like, there's a theme of consistency, and there's a theme of curiosity, and there is
Mhm.
a theme of continuous improvement, that I hear when you share this. And I think that, a lot of us are living in a world where our innovations are stifled, our ideas are stifled. We're
Yeah.
having a hard time meeting the best versions of ourselves because the world is just really loud. In some way, somehow, you seem to have been able to silence noises around you to say, like, okay, I'm ready for these next steps. I'm ready for these next steps. And I think that, one of the things that I always say about entrepreneurs is that entrepreneurs are people that can literally see what's coming. They are
Mhm.
people that can really identify problems that other people sometimes don't even know exist, and like build solutions around it. And so when you and I met, I think you were in the thick of just building Grid 110. I think
Mhm.
really early on, but Grid 110 also just celebrated 10 years of impact. I know that all of these experiences ultimately led you to start your own first business, which was Grid 110. Tell us about the origin stories of Grid 110, and what problem were you trying to solve?
Yeah. So you and I met, I think, at a pretty interesting time for me. I feel like because I think it was when you were first expanding to Los Angeles, right?
Mhm.
And that probably would have been around the like 2018
Yes.
timeframe, I think. So I had just stepped into the role as the founding executive director for the organization, but the organization was actually founded 3 years earlier. So kind of
Oh, I didn't know
yeah,
that. Okay.
yeah. So where we left off and kind of the closing of that past chapter of me kind of going through this like slight existential third like 30% of my life crisis of what am I going to do next? I have no idea. I have all this experience and expertise. I had, gotten to a salary that I was really excited about and to a title that I was really about. But as I started looking out, interviewing for other jobs, I was not excited about the prospects of doing the same thing that I had just been doing. I got this like an offer through an agency to do a 9-month consulting, project management role for a back end of a financial services website, and it would have given me the exact same pay that I was getting before, and it would given me 9 months to kind of figure everything else out. And just in my like, I sat with it, and in my heart, I'm like, "I can't do this. I can't take this. This is not what I wanna be spending my time on, and I don't know what that is, but I'm excited to explore and figure that out." So I was living in downtown Los Angeles at the time, and if you're familiar with LA, at the time, so this was 2014, at that time, and even still today, most of the tech ecosystem kind of congregates and resides on the west side of LA. So that's like Santa Monica, Venice, Playa Vista. Downtown LA, technically the city center of Los Angeles from a finance and physical like geography perspective, is about 16 miles to the east of that. And as you know, can take anywhere from 20 minutes to 2.5 hours to get there. And so I had been living and working on the west side, but at that time I found myself living in downtown, and it was a really exciting time to be in downtown. There's a lot of energy, lots of, it's a mini microcosm, the closest thing to New York that we will ever get, I think, on the West Coast, besides San Francisco. And it's urban and has lots of, hospitality. So lots of hotels were coming in, bars, restaurants, residential units were being converted from historic lofts. And it was just like a fun place where you could actually live, work, and play in the same, 2-mile radius. And as I was kind of setting out to figure out what I wanted to do next, I'm like, I don't want to commute to Santa Monica or to the West Side anymore. There's got to be something here. There's so much energy. There's so much creativity. where is the community that I can tap into to figure out what am I going to do next? Most of my jobs that I had gotten up until that point were relationship driven. They weren't through a job website or applying for something. It was because I knew somebody that I had worked for that let me know about an opportunity that, it's kind of the warm intro process. And I'm like, how am I going to network my way into my next thing if I can't find this community? And so really just anything that was happening, creative co-working spaces were opening. So I would go, or events, or I went to a free coding class that was hosted by General Assembly. And that really got me of like, oh, there's actually a lot of people seeking the same thing here. And there are some kind of community elements, but there isn't really any kind of connective tissue around that. And so the General Assembly coding class was actually kind of the thing that really lit me up of like, oh, there was, 90 people in this very small space coming from Orange County and all parts of LA because they're really excited to take a free coding class. And this was in the heyday of coding boot camps. And I'm like, there's something here. They had an office and campus in Santa Monica, but they were maybe looking to expand. And so I guess long story short, I'm like, are you guys actually thinking about doing this? Because I live in downtown. I have some free time. I was, obviously unemployed at the time. Can I volunteer? Can I help out? Can I do something? And so kind of conversations led to them. Actually, they were planning on expanding to a second location. They were looking for somebody to spearhead that. And I worked my way into that particular job to help expand General Assembly's presence in Los Angeles. And so simultaneously at the same time, just started connecting with people in downtown that were excited about kind of tech entrepreneurship in LA and specifically in downtown. And what could we potentially create together? What's missing? And so these conversations led to a group of people who became the co-founding team for Grid110. So the organization that I ended up co-founding. So that was around the 2015 timeframe. And it was really centered around giving, what do entrepreneurs and startups need? What's missing for them? How could we create a platform of connectivity, resources, support, community for them where they don't feel like they have to go all the way to Santa Monica for this, that it could actually be in their backyard. And so we spent some time kind of trying to figure out what are the problems to solve here, talking to different stakeholders from the city and the mayor's office to entrepreneurs and founders that we connected with, to building owners that had a lot of excess space, and kind of coming up with this concept of there's a lot of empty space here, and real estate, commercial real estate in particular, is looking to attract more tech and creative talent, specifically to downtown. And so could we be a conduit for that of like, you want this, this profile of tenant, but you don't speak their language and you don't understand how to reach them. We do. And they're looking potentially for free space, and we want to bring people together. So could we come up with something together that would solve that problem? And that's how Grid110 started.
Yeah. Yeah. And and since then, obviously you stepped down from the CEO role I think it was like maybe 2 to 3 years ago at this point.
Mhm.
But the under your leadership, you touched a lot of entrepreneurs and small business owners. And so I'm curious about, what do you think they taught you about the conditions that have to be true for them to succeed?
Oh man. So much. I mean, as you know, entrepreneurship is hard, like
Mhm.
period, full stop, hard. I think it gets glamorized and maybe people think about like, oh, I want to work for myself because then I don't have a boss and it's like life is going to be easy. And, you read about the TechCrunch headlines and funding and you see the stories and things like that. And so regardless of the type of business, whether you're a solopreneur, freelancer, you're a designer, you're creating a product, you run a retail business, you provide a service, you're creating software, like whatever it is, from lived experience that it's really a constant cycle of like high highs and low lows. I imagine for you, like I've seen lots of really incredible impact reports and funding announcements, multi-million dollar funding announcements that you've gotten from really great corporate grant partners. But like for every one of those, I imagine there's like 5 moments of just like nobody knows, right? Like it's
Mhm.
you in a dark corner in a dark place and just being like, how am I going to power through this?
Mhm.
Um, and so I think it's just like what I've learned from other entrepreneurs and being an entrepreneur myself, is that one, it is hard and it really requires, you know, a deep sense of grit and resourcefulness and drive to persevere through those moments, that you are doing this because you are obsessed about the problem that you're solving, and not because it will give you a certain type of a lifestyle. Like, you really have to wake up and go to sleep committed to the thing that you're trying to do and the problem that you're trying to solve. And knowing that what it looks like may evolve over time, especially as you're testing and getting validation and just getting started. But it's like that problem, it's going to be your why. And so I think having a very clear understanding and connection to that why is something that I have learned, and something that we reinforce, with the entrepreneurs that we've worked with. That can lead to success. It's not, always, like, there are very high failure rates for any type of business, whether, again, small business, a tech startup. But I think at a baseline, like, those things have to be true. And you have to be doing this it's bigger than yourself. And you have to have a very full and clear understanding of that if you want to, like, dip your toe into this space.
Mhm. Yeah. Oh, no, for sure. Listen, I will tell you right now, I've had a lot of success the last 11 years, but I will also say for as much success, there were like a lot of moments of like, oh, wow, this is crazy. And so it really is. I do think so. I do think that the conditions that have to be true for entrepreneurs a lot of times is like access to capital, access to the right information, access to space for them to really think and innovate and cluster map and ideate. And I also think like the power of that why is really important,
Mhm.
because during the dark times that you gotta be able to anchor in on something. And for me, that's always been the vision and the mission of what I'm trying to accomplish, regardless of, what the world is saying is possible. You kind of have to be a little bit delusional,
Oh, yeah.
responsibly delusional, but
Yeah.
delusional.
Yeah, we actually, so I work at a venture capital firm now, and one of my bosses, Austin, has this saying that, in terms of what we look for in terms of your ambition, is that we want you as a founder to be delusional with your vision, but pragmatic with your execution. And so, like, both things kind of have to be true. Like, we want you to be thinking massively big, but also have a really clear and thought through plan about how you're going to get there.
Well, I'm happy that you mentioned that, because I actually want to talk about now that you have transitioned from Grid110 and you're at Slauson Co. You once said that you had a love-hate relationship with venture capital. And I think a lot of people who are raising dollars that have, raised some dollars, to those that have raised a lot of money, they also have a love-hate relationship with venture capital. Tell me how you still ended up at a VC firm knowing that you had this love-hate relationship.
Yeah, and I still do, to an extent. I mean, I'm 2.5 years in to actually being on this side of the table now. So um, I was at General Assembly for 3 years while kind of getting Grid110 off the ground. And then in 2017, so the year before we met, I joined when we got our first funding to become the founding executive director, ultimately went on to be CEO, ran that for 6 years. So I was very much on the founder side. I was, one in the nonprofit world, but on the founder side, and started learning about venture capital that way. I didn't really understand it before. And as we were working with founders, it was like this connection to capital that they needed, and understanding kind of who gets it, who doesn't, why. And, there are business reasons why, in terms of how big the opportunity can be and kind of like the conviction that you might have in the team. But then there are also systemic reasons why, in terms of access and network, and just like pattern matching behavior that has always existed in this kind of club. And I just kind of grew a little bit of disdain for it, of seeing really incredible, smart founders continue to be discouraged around, not getting access to capital. And maybe it was because they weren't accessing the right type of capital, or they didn't understand how to frame the opportunity. So I wanted to learn more about it and be like, is it really this like old boys club? Is there something we can do about this? And I think, the hate part of it is really just, especially, even 2.5 years in, is I think how dismissive it can be to founders. And people talk a lot about pattern matching being an issue. Investors are typically looking for a certain type of pedigree when it comes to a founder that they would invest in. So, did they go to Stanford or Harvard? Have they worked in big tech? Have they exited a company before? Do they have kind of the expertise? Do they have a CTO or not? And so, like, all these things where if you just look at somebody on paper, you're kind of looking typically for some certain things that might stand out to you that could reflect that this is somebody that you actually want to take a big risk on, because it is a huge risk in terms of capital. So, what needs to be true? What kind of conviction do you need to have, especially if maybe they're pre-product or pre-revenue at the very early stages? And sometimes I even see it just like investors are like, I don't understand this. A woman might be pitching a women's health femtech company to a man, and they're just like, I don't get it. And so do they take the time to understand it? Do they ask women colleagues or family members, or have they already spent like understanding that this is a massively overlooked opportunity that you should be investing more capital in, but why aren't you, type of a thing. So those are the things that I just have always kind of rubbed me the wrong way, especially learning more about it. But I also see, what it is capable of doing, and not just from a, potential like generational wealth creation aspect, from an outcomes perspective for founders, their teams, their communities, but also just the products and services that need to exist that simply just don't right now. And, the problems that you and I face might be unique in a way, but they're not, because other people also experience those problems. And I think, when a concentrated amount of capital is going to a select few that don't necessarily represent the now emerging majority of this country, there are massively overlooked opportunities. And so that's where I think I get really excited about the potential of that, and specifically around kind of overlooked and underserved founders and problems. Because I think that there is a massive opportunity there that is being overlooked. And so I think that's why I made the decision for two reasons. One, the team. So I don't think that there is any other venture capital firm that I would have joined if it wasn't Slauson Co. Just highly mission and values aligned. So the through line of our investment thesis is economic inclusion. So creating more opportunities for more people. The team is exceptional. It's led by our two GPs, Austin and AJ, who are, before I even joined, two people that I respected the most in this industry. 2.5 years in working for them, still the two people that I respect most in this industry, because of, the way they move, how they move, how intentional they are, what I've learned from them. And I think it's just like really exciting to see if a VC firm do things differently. So whether it's the content that we're putting out, the founders that we're investing in, how we host events and things like that, the spaces and the communities and the networks that we gather and convene together. I think it was just, there was such strong alignment with who I had kind of found out myself to be in this like next chapter of my life, who I wanted to surround myself with, and where I wanted to take this next journey with my career was specifically with Slauson.
Yeah. Yeah. No, thank you for that. And I think one of the things that you just said that really resonated with me was that the majority of this country, what was once not the majority of this country, like it does create opportunities for us to really reimagine what opportunity looks like. And I'm even thinking about my own story. My first investment came from Camelback Ventures. And if it wasn't for that $40,000. A lot of people don't think $40,000 is a lot, but when you are in the beginning stages of your entrepreneurial journey, every dollar counts. And that investment sent a signal to a lot of other investors in the philanthropic space that we were worth it. And so I don't think people realize like how important capital is in order to bring ideas to life, and how widely not distributed capital still is in our country for certain communities that have a tremendous amount of talent and ideas that just oftentimes don't get the fair shot to even bring their ideas to life. So I have a question for you based on this, right? Because
Yeah.
I think that Obviously, with your experiences with building Grid 110 and having kind of like a community driven accelerator there, but also a community driven accelerator as Slauson that you are also now overseeing. If you had to redesign the early stage support ecosystem from scratch, what would that look like?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it was stuff that I was kind of looking into in starting Grid and, what are the problems to solve and what does a thriving ecosystem look like? And there are kind of like charts and like canvases around what this looks like. And I think it's kind of certain things need to be in place for there to be an ecosystem. And so it's, talent. So whether that's the entrepreneurs themselves and the people with ideas to the people that they will hire. So a high caliber of talent. That talent typically comes from educational institutions. So there have to be strong educational institutions there, universities that potentially have, strong now entrepreneurship or CS programs. There has to be some layer of connectivity when it comes to community. So convenings, events, like places for people to connect or hackathons or things like that. Mentorship is really important. So for people that are just first starting out, their first company, who can they learn from? And there has to be capital. So I think those are kind of like the primary core pillars that need to exist for a ecosystem just to be created. But in order to, thrive and be successful, I think that it's like the caliber of those things also plays a role. And I think that there's really no, single playbook, because what works in San Francisco is not going to work in Detroit or Atlanta or in LA or Birmingham, Alabama. And I think each of these ecosystems, outside of the coasts, have started to emerge and are becoming really exciting because they have their own unique, things that are coming out of their specific ecosystems. And so whether that is proximity to specific industries, you think about like where Walmart is headquartered. I think it's in Arkansas, and there's a big like budding supply chain industry there because this headquarters is there. You think about things that are happening in Detroit and what they've been through and just like the resilience of the people, but also companies that maybe were founded there and the founders having exits there and being able to re-pour back into those communities. So I think it takes a lot of different things. Some things that I think I would love to see specifically on the early stage side, more private public partnerships. And so we really benefited from that in terms of support from the city of Los Angeles and funding from the city. And you think about, there's entrepreneurship programs at universities, there's incubators and accelerators in cities that are, typically privately owned or created. There are small business development resources that are funded by the city, but they're all kind of separate and do their own thing. There's not a through line or connective tissue. There's a lot of redundancy, I think. And I think they can each learn from each other. So the small business, support centers, they do things in a very maybe old fashioned or traditional business building way. And I think they could benefit to learn from like lean startup methodology. So instead of having somebody build a 30-page business plan, have them do a 1-page, business canvas model, and really identify problem solution, how it's different, how you're going to get customers, et cetera, before you even start building a business. And then I think about how all the small businesses have to register with the city for tax purposes, and startups are trying to sell their services to small businesses. And so are there more ways that we could be more efficient in connecting all of these different players and learning from each other, and just having the cities in particular just make that a priority from an advancement perspective, because then that will create a lot more opportunity. It creates a lot more jobs, which is what the city cares about. More jobs, more taxes. And so I think that there's just a lot of learnings from other ecosystems and players who've benefited really highly from public-private partnerships.
Hmm. Yeah. And I think that what you're hinting at is that there is a level of complexity and collaboration that has to happen with people that do have mutual interests, like they have
Mhm.
shared interests, but sometimes they don't have the capacity, sometimes they don't have the resources to push the collaboration or these coalitions forward that would make the ecosystem much better and much more accessible to founders and entrepreneurs. And I think what ends up happening too, though, is that founders and entrepreneurs also don't realize that there is a business behind the ways in which people are making decisions. And so it can feel really personal when they're getting a no, or it can feel really personal when something is not working in their favor. And so when you think about the founders and entrepreneurs that you've worked with and the ones that you are now working with at Slauson Co, what do you think are the signals that matter that a founder and an entrepreneur has to send you beyond product and traction that makes you feel like this is a business or an entity that can succeed? Because I think what happens a lot of times is that folks personalize it. They personalize not getting the investment, but they don't realize, like, actually, y'all, there are true financial models that go into making these decisions. And there are numbers that are used to back whether or not an investment can be made. I mean, and someone can say, well, Jessica, that's not totally true. There are some people that just come through with an idea, no traction, no product, no revenue, and still get the funding.
Mm-hmm.
Which obviously those those are real things that happen as well. But for those that are just trying to figure out, like, I gotta have all of my ducks in order, right, in order to stand up the fight. Like, what are the ducks that have to be in order, in your opinion?
Yeah, but to your point, there are exceptions to every rule. So like when people say that, we look for X, Y, and Z, have at least this amount of revenue or traction or whatever it might be, and then you see them invest in somebody who has nothing. There are always exceptions to every rule. The exceptions are very difficult to come by, but I think in the 8 years that I've been working with founders, I think the two things that come through really strong in terms of kind of hindsight, looking back on the founders that have been most successful, or kind of like we figured out that there was a there, and like the hunch was right, or like had really strong conviction around them, especially if they had nothing, if they had no product, no revenue, just them and an idea, which is a lot of the companies that we end up, working with and investing in. It comes down to the like primarily two things. It's really the team. So that individual. And then so it's examining the individual or individuals on the team, whether you're a solo founder or have co-founders or have, an initial team. It's what does your lived experience look like? And this is really something that we put a premium on at Slauson, is that your lived experience is your competitive advantage. And so whether that is you've worked in an adjacent or direct space that you are identified a problem for, you have unique insights and work experience and relationships, that nobody else, trying to start a similar type of business, if somebody had, tried to start it but didn't have your experience, they probably would fail. But because you have this unique lived experience and these unique insights and, know who to sell to, or can kind of like cut the corners in a way because of the expertise that you have, it builds a really strong conviction on the investor side that they're a smart person, they'll be able to figure it out. I think the second thing is really around kind of related to what we talked about a little bit earlier, is around their why and the problem that they're solving. And do we believe this problem to be true? And what is their solution to that problem? And how is that connected? And do they have a plan? Like, do they have a plan? How do they develop it? Do we believe in it? Because a lot of this stuff, it's hypothetical, theoretical. It hasn't, been done yet. At least, they're putting words on paper to be like, this is my idea. This is who I am. This is what I think I can do with the capital that you invest in me. And so how strongly do we believe in them and their capabilities to be able to do that, especially if they have nothing, if they have no product, if they have no customers, if they have no revenue? But so we look at traction in terms of like progress. What progress have you made based off of the resources that you have? If you have little to no resources, you can still be creative and resourceful and, go talk to 50, 100, 500 people and ask them about, is this a problem for you? What are you learning from kind of clear data points from the conversations or interviews or surveys data that you're getting? And does that validate like direction that you're trying to build kind of this solution and this path in? So I think there's so much that you can do that doesn't require capital. A lot of people say like, oh, I need the funding in order to do X, Y, and Z. And it's like, actually, you don't. There's so many things that you could do to validate something for free. It takes your time, it takes your creativity, it takes your resourcefulness. And so those are the things, the signals that we look for, especially at this very early stage. Like, do we feel like they have really strong potential?
Yeah. Yeah, you know what? I'm really happy that you mentioned that about like the idea of being resourceful, because I do think that there are a lot of people that let the capital, granted, like money is important, y'all. For those of you who are listening, I'm not underskirting how important money is. But when I'm thinking about my own journey, like I made a lot happen with $500. You know what I'm saying? So I do think there is a need to be resourceful, especially in the beginning stages of entrepreneurship. I also think people don't realize that like when you take on venture capital, there is an expectation of a return. So it's
Yep.
not people just giving you these dollars and then you think that you can do whatever with it, right? No, like people are trying, they're giving you 100, they're trying to get to 100,000, right? If they're
Mm-hmm.
giving you 50,000, they're trying to get like the 5 million, right? And so if you cannot present a clear plan of action, a lot of times those are the reasons why you're not going to get the funding. And so on the opposite end of this though, right, Miki, like for those that come to the table, for the founders that come to the table when they have the plan and they have the resources and they've done the good job and they have really proved themselves where this investment can actually be catalytic for them. What do you think investors can do better to still make sure that they cover their own blind spots about markets that they might not serve, that actually can really hurt an idea if they don't give the investment because they haven't done the work as investors to do the due diligence on their part
Mm-hmm.
to uncover the gaps in their own understanding?
Yeah, this is so important. And it's stuff that we spend, like we don't have expertise in all of the spaces that the companies that we've invested in do. It's, a bit of having a heavy amount of conviction and trust in the entrepreneur being the smart person. And like, I trust them. They know this better than anybody else. And what they will provide to them more tactical support beyond just the capital, right? And I think as we're assessing companies in the very early stages before we even get to kind of making the cutting a check and welcoming them into our portfolio, is we have to do our own work. And so it's reading through their materials and like, does this make sense? And potentially talking to other people. So talking to, if they have investors already, talking to their investors about like, what did you see in this opportunity? It could be talking to some of their customers about what we're using before and why did you decide to switch to this? It could be talking to people that maybe are not their customers, but could be in their customer segment. So I guess a couple of examples of, in healthcare spaces that we've invested in where nobody on our team has healthcare experience. We've been, we have experience interacting with the healthcare. So from like a patient perspective, we can definitely give that lens. But if we're looking at a mental health app, if we're looking at something around therapy, and if there is no exposure experience to those types of things, who can we talk to get better informed around that? Can we talk to other founders that have built in a space? Can we talk to professionals, so therapists or mental health practitioners or doctors? So if you're selling into a doctor, can we talk to one of them and see like, what are you using now? Is this something that you would want to buy? Why is this something that you would use? Is it kind of game changing and groundbreaking for you? So we have to do our own research, our own work to come to the table, to have conviction around an opportunity if we don't know a lot about it. And I think that's like table stakes. So at this point of, if we are trying to invest in the future and it's not something that we have exposure experience with, how can we get it in a very short period of time? How can we learn from people smarter than ourselves around that? So I feel like it should at this point be a requirement. And for most people, I think it is from a research perspective. But that's, like I said earlier, about sometimes investors can be dismissive if it's a space that they don't understand because they're not taking the time to understand it.
Yeah. And, there was a period of time in my own fundraising journey. Granted, my fundraising is different, but I think some of the concepts still are the same in that, like, sometimes you have to convince people that are not clear on the problem that you're trying to solve, on why this is a problem in the first place, right? And I think that, for folks that are lacking capacity, a lot of times like that research just feels like extra work, right? It feels like the extra thing to do. But I always tell founders is like, what are the things that you can come to the table with that actually might easily, in a way, create a digestible framework for them to get the information they need faster, right? Like,
Mhm.
is it a brief? Is it a document? Is it a, two-pager that summarizes the problem, the market, the opportunity? A lot of people will say, well, that's my pitch deck. But I was like, actually, no, the pitch deck is very different in my mind than like the research, right? The pitch deck is like, this is the high level of what I'm trying to solve and what I'm trying to build. And then the research is like, is that deck actually saying the truth,
Mhm.
right? And so, have you found that founders have gotten more savvy with providing education to their investors that limit the amount of research that the investor has to do?
Well, I think, AI has on both sides of that table made that a lot more efficient. So for investors doing research, ChatGPT or your AI platform, LLM of choice, as it gets smarter and gets trained on more data, that becomes a little bit easier than just doing like a Google search, right? I know that there are tons of reports out there that, somebody might have done a study on a market size or something like that, that are paywalled because you have to pay thousands of dollars for it. But now you can kind of access that information for free or for $20 a month using, these LLMs. And I think similarly, founders are using it to do their own customer discovery and research. And I think the important thing is to make sure that it's citing sources, and so that you have those actual, factual data points or sources to be able to attribute to whatever it is that you might be saying, and that your chat GPT just isn't hallucinating and lying to you and telling you what you want to hear. So it's a little bit of being able to use that for efficiencies, but also just making sure that you're documenting and have fact checked everything. And so I think the age of AI has really, I think, just expedited how quickly we can gain information, can validate things, can learn about things, and have seen both sides of the table really using it to their advantage.
Mhm. Yes, yes. And on that topic of AI, I think that we're in an incredibly transformative time right now, not just in the world, but specifically for a lot of tech startups, a lot of people who are just building things, right? I think we've seen business models really get hurt by AI, and then we've seen some that have really been able to take advantage of the new tools and technologies that have been created to build new and exciting products and services. And so, when you're thinking about your investment thesis at Slauson Co, or even just your personal investment thesis, it doesn't even have to be tied to the company you're working for right now. Like, what do you think is going to evolve in the pre-seed and seed landscape over the next 3 to 5 years, that might be because of all of the changes that artificial intelligence is actually causing to the industry?
Yeah, I think that AI has just changed so many things in a very short period of time, and it is evolving so quickly. It's like, where it was last year to where it is this year, it's kind of insane. And I think what that has enabled people to do, so from being able to build technology faster because of AI, maybe not having to have a technical co-founder or a CTO, at least to start, and being able to put together proof of concept in like a day. And so being able to say, like, I don't know how to code, but I can go to Cursor, Replit, Lovable, and feed it my idea, and with some inspiration, can kind of come up with something that will at least allow me to test this, to show it to people and be like, this is what I'm thinking about. Like, what do you think? Let me get feedback on it. So I think there will be an expectation that you will be able to build your product faster, grow faster. The revenue kind of requirements for pre-seed and seed are getting a little bit out of hand because of AI, because there is this expectation that you can do these things faster. So I think that founders will have to really get with the program around that. And, if they have been putting off AI, or there's like, we're not an AI company. Every company can be an AI company. You can be incorporating it on your administrative side, your note takers, just like to streamline things for research. But there are also ways that you can just make things more efficient in your own product. And so if you're not using these things and these tools, you're going to get left behind. And I think especially a lot of investors are only investing in AI right now. Not all, but like many of them are. And I think it will just get more competitive. And so if you aren't incorporating AI, there might be no interest in you and you may get passed over. And so I think it's being really open to that, being open to like the new and evolving technologies. And so I think that, where will we be in a year? It's actually really hard to say just because of the shift happening so quickly and the timelines getting kind of condensed even shorter, to really have no clue about what the future is going to look like. I think every few years we go through these different cycles of, the web 1.0, then it was 2.0, then it was 3.0. I'm really glad that part is over because I was really not into the blockchain and crypto stuff. But I think now we're back, AI had a peak in the mid, 2015, 2016, and now it's really back. We're seeing things with AR and VR now that the actual devices are getting a little bit more affordable with like the Meta glasses. So I think there's going to be this pairing of hardware and software and in daily life, in computers, in our phones, in our wearables, that will just be enhancing the things that we do because of these technologies.
Yes. And I think what you just laid out for everyone, if you're a founder and you're an entrepreneur, that's a bar. Whether you like it or not, AI is coming. And so when you are building your products and services, and especially if you're trying to raise VC funding for those things, you might have to go back to the drawing table to make sure that you are, using these technologies to build whatever it is that you're trying to build. I think there's like the pro AI people right now, and then you have like the folks that are very, very like on the fence about the technology. And I'm just like, listen, either way, y'all, it's coming, right? So in my mind, you either are gonna adapt or you're not. And so I appreciate you sharing that. And so then, Miki, my last question for you as we start to wrap up today's episode is, what keeps you excited about, the tech, entrepreneurship, and VC landscape? Because you have a lot of longevity in the space. Your whole career has been really marked by opportunities in digital to opportunities in tech to opportunities in tech and community building. There's still, a lot of motion that I think you have to look forward to in your current role. But I always say that you never know. People get bored, but I don't get the sense that you're bored of this, right? So
No.
what would you say is the thing that keeps you excited about this work? And what do you hope your career evolves into as, the landscape for technology and entrepreneurship and foundership and VC changes over the next 3 to 5 years?
I think the answer, is really always the founders and what they're breathing life into and the creativity and innovative thinking that they have to identify these problems and solve them. I think it's always fun to meet a founder who's working on something. I'm like, how did this not exist before? And whether it's from like a legacy industry perspective or just something that like you have manually done over and over again, and now there is an automated solution or a solution that just like the experience is so like, wow, that was actually a very pleasant or surprisingly like fun experience, and it just felt like magic, right? And so I think that's like the power of technology, and that's something that has always, again, going back to childhood, around like curiosity and being, having access to technology and considering myself an early adopter of things, is being at the forefront and kind of on the cutting edge of what the future is looking like and what is being built next. I want to hear things being talked about in the mainstream. So I was at an airport earlier this year, and when you hear people that you wouldn't suspect are talking about like ChatGPT at the gates. My mom used Perplexity to plan her whole Asia trip. She's 75 years old. And so seeing that this is not just a tech community thing or an early adopter thing, that it is now exploded into the mainstream, that everybody is talking about it, like what will be next around that. And I think that's what keeps this space so exciting, is that there is always something new. There's always a new innovation. And so whether it is hardware or software or the combination of the two, and a new technology that we don't even know exists. In my last cohort, I had a company that was working on a space tech company. And so just like things that, like I will never be able to touch space, but like, that's so cool that you're working to build this like interconnected chain of satellites to build a data center in space. And so to have this type of forward thinking and maybe be probably be a lot delusional around what you think you can accomplish and then putting together this really tactical plan to get there. I think that's what keeps this exciting and fresh and always learning something and continuing to be inspired by entrepreneurs that are solving these problems. I mean, we work for them. Like we work for our LPs and our investors too. That's our whole, we're stewards of their capital and we want to return their investment, but we also work for the founders. And I think there's often a misconception about kind of the power dynamic of that the investors are in the decision-making seats and not the founders. No, it is the other way around. It is our job to find and invest in exciting and innovative founders and companies. And so they are in the driver's seat. They are the ones that are building the future. They are the ones that are going to make these things happen. And we get to play a small role in the journey and come along for the ride. So that's what keeps me in. And there's nothing else I'd rather be doing.
Yeah. Oh, I love this combo. You know what, Miki? I actually have so many other questions for you.
I have so many questions for you too.
Like, honestly, I think at some point we probably got to do a part 2 to this, because I also just had like a lot of questions around your thoughts around like jargon that's used, language that a lot of times in the VC space people can't democratize. Like, I remember I had a homegirl that was like, girl, they just sent me a document. It's called a term sheet. What do I do with it? And I was just like, girl, I don't know. Right? Like, you gotta go talk to some lawyers, right? And so I do think there's so much knowledge to be had around entrepreneurship, and especially for founders that are trying to raise venture capital. So we're going to have to do a part 2 to this. You could count me on it. All right, everyone. So everybody, shout out to Miki, everybody. Make sure that in your homes you are snapping for her. This was such a really great interview. I know I learned a lot and I'm re-inspired again. I think you and I share the ethos of like continuous building, continuous improvement, continuous innovation. I'm just as excited about things that are being built by people. And I'm really excited to see like what this next phase of, your work looks like now that you are in traditional VC. And for those of you who listened today, I hope you got something out of it. I know I did. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to leave us a rating on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, and on social media. And I will see you all next week. Peace out. Thanks for tuning in to today's episode of Behind the Work. If you enjoyed today's episode, make sure that you subscribe to our channel on YouTube. Check us out on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and follow us on social media. I'm really looking forward to seeing and hearing how this show is leaving an impact on you.